I think that the Republican Party at this stage, they have been unable to cure their MAGA infection. And while our party's convention had a mixed bag where there were some wins for the alt-right side, I think the presidential nomination was a firm repudiation of that attempt to bring MAGA into the Libertarian Party.
After MAGA Republicans and Fox News hosts struggled to spin the fact that Donald Trump recently suffered the ultimate humiliation at a national Libertarian Convention, one of the nation's top libertarians shut down their lies in brutal fashion, and we have to talk about it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video. Recently, as you know, Donald Trump was mercilessly booed and heckled at the National Libertarian Party Convention, in which they were electing or selecting their nominee for the President of the United States. We'll play some clips to refresh your memory on that glorious interaction. But in the meantime, I want to first remind you of what Fox News hosts and MAGA Republicans had to say to try to spin that humiliation.
Now, this would seem to be a favorable environment for the president, maybe more favorable than some of the other events he's done in the last week, showing up to the Bronx, showing up at a libertarian event, which, you know, they love him there too. But
again, you hear her voice jump up an octave because she struggles to sell the obvious lie. That was Tomi Lahren on the Fox Propaganda Network. Then you also have MAGA Republican senators like Mike Lee debase themselves similarly.
Well done, President Trump. I think you won the hearts and minds of a whole lot of libertarians out there and a whole lot of other Americans. Thank you.
Again, pure cope from Mike Lee, who, again, just a spineless, weird person who just debases himself in front of Donald Trump. That's how they have tried to spin this situation, okay? But then you have one of the top libertarians in the country, the executive director of the Libertarian Policy Institute, and libertarian policy does sound a bit oxymoronic, but he cut through the BS pretty bluntly during a recent interview on MSNBC and shut down these MAGA copes and MAGA lies.
I think that the Republican Party at this stage, they have been unable to cure their MAGA infection. And while our party's convention had a mixed bag where there were some wins for the alt-right side, I think the presidential nomination was a firm repudiation of that attempt to bring MAGA into the Libertarian Party. And from what I'm watching, the reaction of the people who brought Donald Trump, they are very much sad and demoralized and complaining that the Libertarian Party turned them away. But that's how we treat people who try to come in a disrespectful fashion, who try and occupy our party with values that don't resonate with our 5-decade history of individual freedom, of social tolerance and civil liberties. I think that
So again, I mean, it's pretty blunt, referring to MAGA as an infection, which I think you could make that argument. It certainly has a cultish virility to it, right, and viral strain. But yeah, there's no bones about it. There's no two ways about it. The libertarians, if they're truly principled, would be as far from Donald Trump as they can possibly get, given that, again, Donald Trump is an open authoritarian, not libertarian. This is a guy who doesn't believe in rule of law. This is a guy who doesn't believe in representative democracy. This is a guy who doesn't believe in small government to the extent that libertarianism and conservatism exist on a spectrum which tend to favors the right wing. And again, this is not me carrying water for the libertarian movement. As I said in the previous video discussing this, official libertarian chapters like the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire have said some genuinely unhinged things. Like, for example, if a child is born into poverty and there's no one who is willing to take care of the child based on their own sense of charity and largesse, they've explicitly said that that child should be allowed to die because no one is entitled to the labor of others. So no taxes should not be extracted to provide for the welfare of impoverished children. That's really gross and despicable, and further proof, again, that the Libertarian Party will never be a meaningful, power block, because even most conservatives, I think, in terms of conservative voters, would say that's really gross, even though I believe that as a political institution, the Republican Party obviously doesn't care much by way of social safety nets. Republican voters do. So the Libertarian Party, again, not me defending them, but in terms of their stated principles, that Again, what did that guy say? They're talking about social tolerance and civil liberties. These are things that Donald Trump not only doesn't stand for, he emphatically opposes, right? This is a man who says he wants to use the power of the executive branch to hoard more power onto the executive branch, to erode checks and balances, who wants to sick the executive offices under him on, dissenting media or reporters that he doesn't like. He wants to open up libel laws to sue for libel and defamation. He wants to punish people. He wants to use the awesome power of the presidency to punish people. He wants to deploy the military for domestic purposes. Donald Trump is no fan of civil liberties whatsoever. And that's precisely why, again, as a reminder, he was booed and mercilessly heckled at the Libertarian National Convention.
The Libertarians in the White House.
Love it. One more, again, just a sweet palate cleanser in this respect.
The Libertarian Party should nominate Trump for President of the United States. Whoa. That's nice. That's nice. Only if you want to win. Only if you want to win. Maybe you don't want to win. Maybe you don't want to win.
Again, visibly angry at that, visibly angry at the reception, because, again, he's used to a cultish following. But that's not what he meant there, because the libertarians there were principled enough to say, listen, there are certain... I'll say this. There was obvious truth to some of what Trump said in the sense that libertarians they'll never nominate someone who will become president of the United States. We live in a duopoly. It's either going to be a Democrat or a Republican, absent major revolutionary reforms to our system of government. And we're just not there yet. So if libertarians do want to exercise more power, then yes, they're going to have to engage in some sort of coalition building with elements of the bigger parties, Democrats or Republicans. But again, we're not just talking about specific compromises. If you're going to build coalitions of ideologically diverse movements that exist on a continuum, you will have to make certain compromises. Part of the reason, look at the Democratic Party, the Big Tent Party, right? You have Bernie Sanders and AOC on one side, and then you have Kyrsten Sinema, Joe Manchin, Josh Gottheimer on the other. A wide spectrum that exists between these progressives and the moderates, and certain they each have to give. Now, unfortunately, it seems like progressives end up having to give much more than the moderates, which is something that should be rectified. But the idea is that you tend to have broad things in common, or at least certain key broad things in common, even if other particular things you don't, and you make compromises along the way and work together. The libertarians wouldn't be doing that by signing up with MAGA. They would be joining an openly authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle, right? These aren't like minor compromises. This isn't, I want the marginal tax rate at 15%, you want it at 16%. It's nothing like that. It would be fundamentally antithetical to who the libertarians claim to be, which is why they rejected Donald Trump so emphatically at the convention. He only earned, I think, 6 votes, and that was due to write-in, right? Now, also want to play this too. This is CNN talking about how this had to be a shocker for Donald Trump. It was a risk, to be sure, but how it had to be intensely upsetting. We saw it on his face. But why was it so upsetting? Well, CNN breaks it down.
This does not happen to Donald Trump very much. No. I mean, as much as, we see these rowdy crowds at his own rallies, they are very careful about keeping him away from this kind of stuff. And it just sort of blew up in his face.
That's what was so surprising for a campaign team this time around that is very focused on making sure that he doesn't get this kind of reaction. I think there's going to be some hell to pay within the campaign staff. He looked discombobulated. He looked redder than usual, sweaty, deer in the headlights, because this is not the kind of reaction that he normally gets. But look, from a strategic standpoint, it shouldn't be surprising. Donald Trump's agenda and his policies are the furthest thing from libertarian that you can get. And so it doesn't surprise me that when he is somebody who wants to tell women what to do with their bodies, who wants to take away people's rights to vote, who wants to essentially control so many communities within the United States, and has said that he was going to be a dictator on day one, that's not something that libertarians are going to support. And this is clearly the evidence of that.
Well said. So yeah, I love that, the fact that, again, I was going to let this story go, but when I saw that the executive director of the Libertarian Policy Institute come back and emphatically say that, again, MAGA is an infection. It's a cult. It's antithetical to what the Libertarian Party stands for, and they want no part of it. I felt that was worth pointing out. Further repudiation of Donald Trump is always a good thing. It's better for America that way, even when it comes from, again, the Libertarian Party, which very often says the most unhinged stuff that you would possibly imagine. But good stuff all the way around. The anti-Trump coalition has to get pretty wide. Let me know what you think in the comments.